Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Osquery office hours. Here in Boston, it is fall. It's late October. The leaves are turning red, and we're coming up on Halloween. I know not everyone celebrates, and maybe it's not fall where everyone is, but hopefully it's a nice October. So welcome. Maybe the first announcement is we have a new standing meeting invite now. So, one of the things that happened for a long time, Trail of Bits made our old meeting back before Osquery was a community project, and they remade it. And now maybe it's open to everyone to join, so we don't have to wait for people. There's a couple more meeting admins. I don't know, new link, whatever. So hopefully everyone found their way here okay. And maybe the other announcement, which will probably become an agenda item, is that 5.10.2 is now out and in beta. So that's one that we're kind of checking out. Yeah, so that's what I've got for announcements. Other people? Okay, next section in the meeting is sort of an open section for questions, issues, PRs, anything anyone wants to bring up that maybe they weren't comfortable flagging as an agenda item. I'll pause for a moment, though you all look familiar, so, Okay, well, moving on to agenda items. I think probably the major agenda item is the 5.10 release. So to recap, we had a 5.10.1 release in beta, and people found an issue with something around the FIM and the mute paths that I can only half understand, but I think consensus was reached. That got patched, and we cut a 5.10.2 over the weekend. So I think the question now is, has 5.10.2 gone through enough testing to be stable, or do we want to let it hang out on the test fleets for a little while?
So Chris has deployed it on a bunch of hosts at scale, and the patch is working and seems to be working great. That's the feedback I got. I invited him here, but he had a conflict. And given that there's only one kind of commit between 5.10.1 and 5.10.2, I don't think there's like a build test-ish fix with Python and this one and the changelog. I don't think there's anything else in between those two.
That looked pretty small when I was making that changelog and cutting the release.
So my kind of view is that it's just 5.10.1. We identified it, we fixed it. So 5.10.2 is basically 5.10.1 plus the hot fix or hot patch, whatever you want to call it.
Zach was also saying that they have deployed the betas, and so they are endorsing it. So, meaning we can mark it stable for Zach.
Yeah, Collide's got 5.10.1 and then 5.10.2 on our not very big beta fleet, and we haven't seen any issues yet. So I think we're probably, this is about as much testing as anything ever gets. So I don't know. Sounds like maybe everyone thinks it's stable.
Yeah, at least yes for me.
Okay, I think that's it then. We'll call it stable after the meeting. Or yeah, we'll go click things. Okay. But maybe I'd mention Mike's not here, but I wanted to thank Mike and maybe Stefano. Stefano's been involved. They're moving some YouTube things around. So we started setting up an Osquery Foundation YouTube channel and creating a place to drop office hours in there. And I assume Mike and maybe Stefano are doing great jobs, and eventually we'll change some links around.
Yeah, so Mike currently is uploading and is actually also hitting limits. I think because it's a new channel and these are new uploads, so he's, at least initially, he was able for one day to upload 10 a day, but then the day after only 5. We'll see. Probably it will stay around 5, and maybe a while, like in a few months, when we'll be able to upload more. But we normally don't have that necessity, so it will take a little. But yeah, there's no issue from our side.
Well, thank you both for doing the shoveling of bits around. So. Those were sort of the agenda items I had. Mike, you showed up. I was just saying thank you for moving YouTube videos around.
Yeah, that would be a process. I don't know if Stefano told you, but yeah.
Yeah, mention the limit.
You know, I think the only thing I'd say about limits is that if you want to be able to upload today's one, just be cognizant of your limits on every other Tuesday.
Every other Tuesday? Oh, you mean like to make sure that the new ones get uploaded first?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, it's annoying because there's a 24-hour limit. So I, set aside time at a certain day. I have to remember to not do it the same time the next day, but rather an hour after that or so. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I don't have any automation tools at the ready for you, so.
I mean, just a daily reminder for me is all I need. The new channel? Yeah, just a moment. It's still starting with oldest videos first, but that would be the new channel. We get the content re-uploaded.
Okay, oh, awesome. I have included that in our meeting notes. This channel doesn't feature other channels. Playlists. Okay, there's a playlist for it. Cool.
Yeah, and because I'm uploading them not necessarily in exactly chronological order, and then if you like touch them after uploading them to edit descriptions, then they also reorder. There will be a playlist, and that's the only way to see them in chronological order. But it's not like I expect people to watch 3 or 4 years of these. So unless you really like seeing our faces.
No, I accidentally just looked at an early one and look younger and chipper.
Is it nice or depressing?
I think it's mostly a reflection of the space I was in better light.
Yeah.
At least for me, I always look younger when I shave my beard off, and I was clean shaven in that one. So, just writing this down. Yeah, thank you again. I know it's a lot of sort of scout work, so seems cool. That's kind of all the major agenda items we had. just before the meeting, we were talking a little bit about sort of Osquery in the larger world, and we could talk about that. Maybe people have other agenda items. Anything people want to talk about?
Has anyone found any other issues with Sonoma? I know there was a Wi-Fi cable that crashed, but I've only had them in a VM and I haven't updated my main computer yet. So
We haven't found much. We haven't gone through and exhaustively tested all the tables, but we did go through and test most of the system security checks we run, and mostly they all seemed fine. The fix instructions that Collide writes all seemed fine. Sonoma doesn't feel like a major update. I'm seeing a lot of build problems with the new Xcode, but that's mostly around like launcher uses C and Go and Zig and cross compilation, and it's proving a little weird on the new Xcodes. But that's not really Osquery.
The only thing I've seen, but this is from quite a while. I'm not sure if this will resolve in any table giving errors actively, but there is a test that is flaky and it's around the parsing of the ALF firewall plist. Although it's weird. I'm not sure if it's related to. So I'm just mentioning just because it appeared like lately, maybe in the last 2 releases before Sonoma, like maybe around Big Sur. And yeah, it's weird because it's actually parsing a file, so there's no. Actually, now I remember. Sorry, there is a file that it is parsing, and this file is fixed. Like it's an artifact that we have saved so that determinism was present for the test. But it actually internally has like a reference that it has to read on the system. So I think that part is what it's not able to parse. I've only looked it briefly and only understood that although this artifact is fixed, what's written there causes the logic to go in the system and try to parse something else. And yeah, that's that's all. I'm trying to find the issue. I can link it, but yeah.
So if a saved
it's a buggy
artifact,
test.
sorry, go on.
Sorry, you overlapped.
Oh, it just seems like it's a buggy test because there's an artifact that it needs to be checking, but it's actually checking a path on the system it's running on the GitHub runners, or because there are often tests that will like save the plist in our config test directory and then check whether it's parsing it correctly or not.
Yeah, that's the case. So this artifact again is saved for the test, and so in the past I think we thought that it was all there, everything that the table needed, but something that is written in that artifact and how the table behaves is that it actually uses something that is written in there to then go on the system and parse another part, which returns something that is not anymore what's expected by the test. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's necessarily like, again, an issue one would see in production or just a simple testing correctness. Yeah.
I think that's the file test you left on the list. Oh yeah, you linked the issue.
Yeah.
Any other exciting things on this one in Sonoma or macOS? Okay. Do people want to talk about like Osquery's place in the world? Do we want to just duck out of here early? What's interesting?
I mean, it is an interesting topic.
Was that brought up somewhere else?
We were
I just
chatting just
attended. Yeah. Sorry, Seth, go on.
No, I was just saying we were chatting before the meeting. I mean, Charbel, why don't you lead?
I was at Objective by the Sea, and I was just talking to people, and people still use Osquery and still very appreciative of all the work that goes in, and had interesting conversations with folks. And I was just remarking, like, I wish I had thought of bringing stickers to give out to people. Most of them are vendors, but there are a couple of people who are like kind of deploying it just plain vanilla Osquery, and they're not on Slack, so I've invited them to Slack. So if a couple of new faces do show up, that's where those are coming from.
So my impression is that most of the Osquery users are either vendors or very large companies that can kind of amortize the cost of an Osquery deployment over their internal fleet. So we see either vendors like Collide, Trail of Bits, Elasticache is around hiding. We don't see a lot of Microsoft, but we know they lurk around the edges. A certain fruit company, things like that. So we see a lot of vendors, and then inside those vendor spaces, there are people who are like pretty big proponents of Osquery. Most of us in this room, for example, and things like that. And then we sort of also find these individuals that seem to really like Osquery as individuals, right? They get into it either because their employer has a larger vendor, they've built their own Osquery deployment. And I guess I'm curious, like when you talk to people at Objective by the Sea or anyone else in your surveils, like who do you meet? Do we have other kind of like target people? Like how do people come to Osquery and what do they like about it?
So there are a couple of MDM vendors who have like a private thing they're working on, but they steal ideas and implementations from Osquery. So like, we figured like you solved this problem, we're gonna just take inspiration. So they kind of see it as upstream, or so that's kind of one category. The other category is, like you mentioned, individuals within large organization who have resources to kind of manually manage and deploy. And those people are just like, hey, how do events work? Or, how does RocksDB store this? And, they're like asking architectural questions. And like, we noticed like the binary size went up, a few releases back or something. So I just told them, come by Slack. We love talking. And, if you have any issues, just open them, bring them up in the office hours. And the others are vendors. Like you said, they do things on top of it. They just embed it or embed older versions or certain parts of it. So that's kind of like the broad category. I also heard some folks, they're like, yeah, we like it, but it's very read-only. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do that. It doesn't use any private APIs, and there's no other way to get the data. So I kind of hear a lot of that as well. It'd be cool to do this. So one example was BTM, the background task management, which is kind of the new. It unifies like launch agents and launch daemon persistence, and kind of gives you an overview of what persisted, where it persisted, how it persisted. and there's a database, but the APIs are of course private, and some people wanted it. The endpoint security does have an event for it, but it of course only supports the newer versions. So those are kind of the conversations I've had. So they want some remediation as well, which is what they find, but they know that's a limitation. It's not like they expect it and then don't find it.
I wonder, like, some of those feel like they can be addressed through the extensions ecosystem, which is something that we as a project don't really talk much about. I mean, they exist, but like you're kind of on your own. Do you know the people who talk about wanting private APIs or remediation support or something? Any sense of like where are they on extensions, or what would that look like to them, or do they not even know? Are they just like, I love Osquery, I wish it solved more of my problems?
I think they don't want to invest themselves in creating or maintaining the extensions. There's also limitations around what kind of extensions we can support. Deploying extensions is also a pain. We have tried to address some of those issues. So yeah, there is that kind of a way to do that all, but I think the barrier is a little bit higher, and then people often wouldn't want to or don't want to commit to the learning curve, and yeah.
A lot of what I've heard as feedback is why, for some reason, we don't support things on day 0 for Sonoma or whatever, and without the understanding that Apple is a very secretive company who hides many things until others discover them, and then we can add them to Osquery or what have you.
But if I can say, even then, I mean, there is the question of who's going to pay for that work. I mean, I'm sure there are customers here that are interested, but well, not always, because there was a cost on updating Osquery to the release that supports it. So we actually, I can say we are actually seeing often actually a disinterest into using the latest version of Osquery, which might contain support for things like that. So yeah. So definitely, if there is someone interested and wants to fund the project, yeah, that would be one of the ways. Obviously, then there are other blockers, as JD was mentioning, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes back to resources and effort.
All that said, I am impressed with some of the places where I find Osquery popping up, either as I'm talking to folks on behalf of Fleet or just in general. The breadth of different types of people, sizes of installations, it just is wide ranging. It's pretty impressive.
I'm frequently amazed at exactly the same thing. Like every now and again, we'll get a bug report or someone will pop into Slack from like some very big company. And I'm just like, you ship Osquery? Oh, wow. And it's a little humbling in a way, right? Like somehow here we are maintaining this tool that is amazing and widely used. You know, I think there's an interesting question, Charbel. You were sort of getting at this right around like, are there ways that we can shift the extensions ecosystem, or the deployment story, or Trail of Bits used to have an extension for managing firewalls. I don't remember if you still do. But I wonder if there's interest in like, what are some reference extensions for, remediation actions using the update API, which I don't even know how many things go near anymore. But then I also, if someone, I find myself wondering, people who want sort of remediation, do they want that in OS query, or is that going to run into the problem where if it's just an OS query without server support, it's kind of hollow, right? If like, if you had a beautiful extension that had remediation options and it had an easy deployment story and all of that, if you didn't have a server that integrated, detection and remediation, what good is it? So I kind of wonder if that's maybe a push towards not so much Osquery, but like something around Osquery and vendor side and like the server side. So I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think, and I'm kind of like going into the weeds right now, but there was some discussion about 3CX and Rust Bucket and the malware that dropped earlier in the year. And like if they wanted like things like, oh, you push, but yeah, there's a server side, you push this rule or signature or YAR rule or YAR signature down, and then kind of, just stop it from executing or whatever. So this is also harkening back to endpoint security only does notify, we don't do authorizations. So they kind of want to close the loop. They provide some intelligence via server side, and on detection, OS can flip into just not notify, but authorization. And I don't think an extension can do this right now because of all the things involved, like code signing, notarization, entitlement. I haven't tried it, but also evented extensions, I haven't tried it. I'm sure there's a way. So those are the things I've been kind of hearing, like what they want. So, but you're right. Like you need Osquery plus something, and that's usually like an orchestration or pushing some rules down or configs down.
Yeah, I mean, I assume an extension can go and get all of the same code signing and entitlements if you wanted it to. I'm less sure on how eventing would work there, but I mean, it's an interesting thought exercise of, what would it be like to try to make endpoint security authorizations work? Like, how would that work? And is there a way to marry detection and not? And like, Osquery has some very, very prototype level rope. Like, you could imagine something where, I don't even know what this would look like, but you could almost imagine something where you had a discovery query for whether or not you should enable some blocking state. right? I think there's something like if you imagined Osquery as moving into endpoint security authorization, I think there's a fairly deep question there about what would that look like and how would you control that? And
Yeah, and I don't have any of the answers, but this is just the conversations I had, and this is what people were kind of talking about or kind of wishing it did more things. And I do like Alessandro briefly mentioned like an expo switch, basically, where you can add things that are maybe not fully baked in.
I like the experimental switches to start testing beta stuff. If we wanted to enable something like endpoint security authorizations or some other remediation flow, I think that's a different to me than experimental. That's sort of like you can disable the carbs or you can have the carbs enabled, right? It's the same kind of, do you want this functionality or not? Alessandro, you were also sort of maybe talking in a slightly different direction.
Yeah. So, like the kind of range you have when you want to implement something new is bound to whatever the official direction of the project is, the nature of Osquery. And so there may be things that we do well or that we do not. And there are things we could implement in a different way, things we could drop if we had a more strict direction for Osquery, like the eventing framework, for example. If we were to think as Osquery as more like an event-based agent just for events, we would probably do the things in a different way, right? And on the opposite side, we have inventory, which is like, yeah, the complete opposite of what we do when we deal with events. And so the architecture we have works really well for one thing, and it's okay-ish for the other things we are trying to do. And sometimes I wonder, because we all have ideas on the kind of things we could do in a Osquery core to push the boundaries, but what I'm trying to say is that there are people here that could try and innovate on some things, but sometimes we are kind of held back by the lack of a strict user story or set of user stories defining Osquery. Sometimes it's clear that it is really, really too far. Like some time ago, we had to deal with forensics user stories. And while they are extremely interesting, we realized that it was exposing Osquery to, it was increasing the attack surface, right? So we ended up choosing not to go down that route. And while in the end, we did not include those functionalities, I think it was great to consider them, to consolidate whether Osquery should do it or not. And yeah, basically, my thought is, what if we had Osquery explain really well its usage on a piece of paper? Could we then innovate and add new things or remove things that don't work too well? Could we evolve the project a little bit more in the future if we had like this set of guidelines.
Hmm.
Can I briefly add on top of that is that especially, I mean, around events, this came, I mean, back when Aptix wanted to, make an optimization internal to Osquery. But yeah, events are being really sought after, and especially on machines that have a lot of them. And yeah, in the current with the current setup is really for Osquery is really difficult to do that, if not basically impossible. So, but we are. I mean, at least the sort of current decision, as we understand it, is that Osquery still wants to be able to like query events with SQL, so it's not really possible to skip some of the optimization. Well, not skip, do some of the optimization that would be necessary for Osquery to work well with events.
Yeah, and going back to inventorying or events, what I'm saying is that we don't have to drop things. We could re-architecture them. Like events could be a separate component that works in a different way compared to everything else. For example, like once we have a project that defines Osquery, then we have more wiggle room to change things. And I'm not gonna say that everyone will be happy about it, because of course, if you decide to drop things that a minority of the users use, but then you remove it, then of course they will hate it, right? But yeah, I mean, if that allows you to evolve the project to keep it on the bleeding edge of things, to keep it usable. For example, one use case that I thought was really cool was using Osquery with live queries. Like whatever you were using detected something on a host, and then you use Osquery to investigate what is happening there as a live investigation session. And I don't know how much this is used nowadays, but yeah, I keep asking myself those questions, and it is hard for me, at least, to define exactly what Osquery. I mean, we can all enumerate what Osquery can do right now.
Hmm.
It's hard to tell whether it is a good idea to do all those things or not. Maybe we can be more focused on certain things and ignore others. I mean, at this point, I'm rambling. I'm just thinking out loud of how to define Osquery.
Hmm. You mentioned events, and one of the things I find myself wondering, I'm not, as a caveat, this isn't a leading question. I'm not actually connected enough to the security industry to know, but I find myself wondering if the security industry has moved away from Osquery in a certain way. Osquery is very based around the idea of defining what you want to know, capturing that data, and moving on, whereas a lot of the security and compliance world seems to be moving much more towards sort of a data lake model of just like capture as much as you can, get every event you can, and put them into some giant heap for future analysis. My own bias is that future analysis never really happens, but it's sort of mostly log trails for post-breach events, which feels like which feels different. And I wonder if sort of industry has shifted away from where we are in a sense.
I've certainly seen the data lake approach you mentioned. And that is one of the reasons I mentioned the events. Like, do we really need to have all that logic in there where we take the events, where we store them on RocksDB, and then we stream it back slowly? Like in a data lake use case, we're going to collect everything anyway, right? And so why don't we just optimize for the best, or well, not for the best, but why don't we optimize for the most common scenario so that we can work really, really well there, rather than just trying to support all the use cases, but with all the disadvantages of a common architecture.
You know, if I think about the people I see using data lakes, and I think about how I imagine they end up using Osquery for that, I think probably you see this evolution where someone goes, oh, Osquery is cool. I can like query for some stuff on these machines, right? I can understand our users deployed or all the firewalls on. And then they sort of start saying, oh, now I need to also add in process monitoring, or now I need to add this other thing. Right? It's not just good enough to know that this thing is or is not on disk. I now need to know the execution. You know, did this thing ever get executed? And to make that step, you really like it's natural to reach for the same tool, right? You say, oh, well, can I just use this thing I have? I don't want to bring in a whole nother thing. So you see that. And I think the other thing that we see is SQL. That the event stream is configurable by SQL is very, very powerful, but also somewhat non-performant, right? You know, it's sort of, if you were to build yourself a thing that just subscribed to every, you know, process execution event, you could probably do that in a significantly more performant way, right? This is what the entire Beats suite of software would do, and, you know, any other thing out there. Intel's had some, I don't know, there's dozens of them, right? But a lot of those are very raw. So if you start thinking about wanting to like join events to users or to something else, like, I don't know. I don't know all the things you would want to join it to. It starts getting very powerful, but then it also starts being very hard to manage at a performance layer. So I feel like there's a lot of tension there. People want very complicated things. Maybe they don't use them. I don't really know.
So in my experience, the joins with events are never a good idea. And like, let's say that we start with process events and we only have the user ID in there. Trying to get the username by joining on a user's table is just gonna be an additional risk condition, because things keep changing. And in my experience, it is much better to just bake everything you can when you produce the data. And that is why I really don't see any kind of positive in trying to use SQL for events. Not only because the joins are bad, but because sometimes there is not a join that you can do that will tell you what you need at the right time, because maybe the event stream is a little bit behind while the query you're trying to do is at the current present. Or maybe you want to have some kind of logic that correlate data, but that has also a failing recovery that is more conservative than just trying with SQL to merge things and maybe end up with nulls or uncertain data. And so, and also I believe, like, so I don't remember who linked it. Someone linked a new schema for events that was really, I mean, those were the columns you were supposed to get with no, configurable parts. And that reflects my experience. Like, our users, or rather, the users I saw personally, really don't really care about, this flexibility of SQL. They just want to match a certain schema. And once you reach it, they're just happy. They don't, yes, that one, OCSF. Once you reach that, they're happy. They don't really care about changing that any further. And yeah, the positive side is that once you bake the schema into the producer, then it's really, really lightweight compared to what we have in Osquery with all the serialization, deserialization, the queries, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't have an answer.
Like, I can maybe make an example for the recovery I mentioned earlier. Let's say that you are missing some data, or for example, with audit and BPF, currently we have a cache that is constructed using procfs, and then we keep this cache alive, trying to use it, keep it up to date, and also use it to fill in the gaps. If we instead had to rely on joins to fill those gaps, using SQL, it would not work. Basically, we would end up with broken or empty columns. And so, yeah, there is no way to bake in that kind of logic into SQL. And so, or maybe you can, like, if we ask Fritz, I'm sure he can create a Turing complete query. He's really good with SQL. I'm not really bad at it. But
What I'll say is that SQL in general, and maybe SQLite, though I'm less sure, aren't built to handle streaming data. So when you start talking about enriching and doing complicated things with streaming data, you're starting to enter into the complex event processing space, CEP. And there are SQL variants that are designed to handle streaming data, but you need sort of the backing of systems to handle that. I worked for a startup for several years that did a lot of early work here. That startup is now long since absorbed into some big companies. But there's been a handful of open source projects in this space, though I don't know if any of them have really seen success. Twitter released Heron a long time ago. Heron and Heron 2 are streaming platforms. Spark and Flink, maybe. I'd have to remind myself about exactly what those are. There was a very old one called Aurora, but I haven't seen a whole lot of. I'm not paying attention to the space a whole lot anymore. But yeah, it's a hard problem, and it's maybe an especially hard problem to cram into the existing Osquery space. Maybe we should all just kind of be pondering, like, what does it look like if we either move away from high performance events explicitly, or if we sort of say, okay, high performance events maybe have to be more disconnected from the SQL. I've been opposed to that in the past. I'm not sure where other people fall on that.
Yeah, and moving away from events, another example I had was people nowadays have containers everywhere, and maybe they cannot even get a query on the host. They have to use it inside a container, and this poses quite a few challenges. And so this ties back to my question on the use cases that we support, the user stories, and whether we can, there are some parts that we could change to make it work better in certain scenarios if they are indeed the common scenario.
I feel like containers have not been a thing we've really picked up. But I think a handful of the vendors out there are certainly playing with what Osquery and clouds look like. Upticks is, certainly hanging out in that space. I think Lacework has something around there as well. And at least a few years ago, Lacework had some Osquery under the hood somewhere, because that's where Teddy went. But I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, we do have some supports here and there, like joining a container from the host or querying for the running Docker containers, for example. Or the experimental BPF branch will, the experimental BPF feature that we have in master will attempt to get the container names. But yeah, it's just bits and pieces and different than supporting a cloud environment from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess even here, the major blocker maybe is determining whether it makes sense to go down that route or not. And so, yeah, again, user stories and use cases.
Yeah. Well, on that note, anyone else have comments or thoughts about this?
Just that I think we should kind of revisit these like sometime. I know we talk about them, but would be kind of nice to kind of like have, once every few months, kind of these vision topics. But that's just my opinion.
Some of what maybe I hear and I'm synthesizing out of all of this is that we don't have clear use cases. Like we kind of have use cases that we sort of think about. I talk about it, Osquery as an API translation layer. We mostly talk about Osquery as being a thing for read-only state off of endpoints. We sort of, I think, hold containers and clouds a little bit at arm's length, right? Like maybe there's something there, but like that's not our primary target. And events are in this big fuzzy gray area to us. Maybe that, I hope, captures what other people think. And I think that raises some questions around, well, should we revisit any one of those questions, right? Like, do we want to embrace events more, or do we want to circumscribe them and say, no, there's always some events, but we're never going to be real high performance here, right? That's just what it is. Or should we embrace events just maybe by nature of where our users are or by where our developers want to go? And containers is another open question. So I don't know, maybe we should sort of imagine and think and revisit it in a few months. I guess maybe as a parting note, I think Osquery already is a little bit muddled under the hood, right? You have scheduled queries, distributed queries, and carves, and those are all, and then events, right? And those are all like 4 slightly different systems for 4 somewhat different use cases. And they're not all super well aligned. So I don't know if there's an overall vision to align them, or if we just accept that, there's some separate use cases, or if the balance between them shifts.
One thing that I've seen people complain about is how chatty Osquery becomes with scheduled queries. And I always wondered, like, sometimes we just keep, alerting about things, even though there is not a real change. And we do have mechanism in place within Osquery to, let's say, duplicate the rows that look the same. But it doesn't always work. And I mean, we still do the work in there, because we handle the query, we create the rows, and then we diff it with the differential, and then we decide whether it makes sense to emit them. And I always wonder if there was a different way to handle this.
I mean, the different way is through events.
Yeah. Also, let me throw a wrench into everything. Something that I just remember. I experimented a bit, at least on Linux, because it is easier there. Trying to sandbox Osquery and its components. It is also something that it is worth investigating, but without a clear picture of everything, it is hard to go in either direction.
Okay. I appreciate all of the thoughts, even if none of them are easy. No one else has anything, then maybe we call this one. But I really do appreciate the thoughts, and I think we should sort of circle back and maybe try and find our way to some use cases. I think it will not be a quick project.
This was almost a therapy session for Osquery.
I don't know if Osquery is unhappy, but I think there is interesting questions. I think Alessandro is right to call out kind of the lack of crisp use cases.
Agree.
Which is also the beauty of Osquery, right? You can do everything.
I mean, that's a fine use case if we want to try and be that, so whatever. Anyhow, I think maybe I will call this one. So thank you all for code reviews, for thoughts, and boldly forward as ever.